Well, welcome to the WPPC's Walk on the Wild Side. This is the second one we've had to do virtually this year because of the coronavirus. So we're at my house. I'm Debbie Groat, and I live just outside the city limits of Crystal Lake. So I'm not bound by some of the rules of the city, but more by the county. We have a small group with us today. So we have Jim Keenan, who is a former president of the WPPC, right? And we should say WPPC stands for Wildlife. This is the most difficult name of a committee you've ever heard. Wildlife Preservation and Propagation Committee. Wildflower. Did I say wildlife? Wildflower Preservation and Propagation Committee. And Chris Hall, who is also a member and is currently in charge of our mentoring program. And Ken Benke, who is the videographer here and talented cameraman extraordinaire, and his wife, Deb. So we all work with the WPPC. The mentoring program began in 2005, and I was a part of that first group. I was a gardener, but I didn't know much about native plants, so I wanted to learn more, and so I applied and was accepted to the first mentoring program and was assigned an amazing mentor who helped me get started with this first garden. It was basically a prairie garden. This tree was here. It was much smaller, of course, but the plants still seem to thrive. So you see a wide variety of green right now, but the spiderwort is the one thing that's blooming right now. So there's asters. There's some goldenrod in here. There are purple cone flowers. There's golden alexanders. There's a lot of petunias. It didn't look like this when I started, of course, but it has spread, and which is what native plants do. And it's important to understand, I think, that you can have native plants in any kind of landscape. You don't have to have a big yard. Mine isn't really big. It's only a half acre. An in-town lot is fine, too. I'm mentoring somebody right now who lives on a pretty small lot, and she's able to add a lot of species to her plantings if you just plant it right. And, of course, you want to do it because you want to provide for the birds and the bees and the things that have been here naturally and much longer than we have. So this is where I first started. You might notice that we have a couple of brown spots in our lawn. We have further away from where I'm standing, there was a tree removed, so I'm trying to grow some grass there. And the larger one is actually a kind of a sinkhole we've had for the 36 years we've lived here. So we fill it in every few years and mound it up, and then it sinks again, and then we do it again, and we plant grass, and it grows, and then when we mow our lawn, we kind of sink down into it. So this is, I think, our third or fourth attempt at filling in this mysterious hole in our front yard. You'll notice also that our yard right now is full of clover. We don't treat our yard with anything. It's green, and we mow it just like everybody else does, and it doesn't seem to bother us or the neighbors, and I don't want to put any chemicals on the lawn. My goal is to make it nice habitat especially for the insects, and particularly butterflies. So after this garden started, I started the area over here by the mailbox. So this is another garden that I planted. A lot of prairie plants, just like the first one I mentioned. We, again, have the spiderwort in bloom. And one of my favorite plants is this, the prairie drop seed. It makes such a pretty mound and is just so interesting. It's a grass. It doesn't really bloom. It has kind of a flower, but what I especially like about it is the smell of it a little later in the summer. There's a lot of asters and goldenrod in here. I've cut them down a little bit because it was hard for us to back out of our driveway and see the traffic, and I've discovered that I can cut them fairly severely until about the 4th of July and then let them grow, and I can see over them to back out of my driveway safely. This year I added a couple of plants that I just wanted to try. One of them is what is called Helen's flower, also sneezeweed, but I prefer the name Helen's flower. My granddaughter's name is Helen, so that's this plant over here. It's got a very interesting stalk, very square and very thick. It requires a lot of water, so this is not the ideal place for it, but as long as I remember to water it, it's okay. And the other one I just wanted to try was turtle head, and that's this plant right here. And I've just got a couple of them in there, just sort of an experiment. You can add and subtract, and if things work, they work, and if they don't, they don't, and that's part of gardening, I think. You add things you like or you think are going to work, and if they do, great, and if they don't, you move them to another place or you find a different plant. I think it's important to provide things for the birds also. So I always have a bird bath. I have 3 of them these days, and lots of bird feeders also, because if the plants are going to attract them, you want to have a place for them to get some water also.
There's an orange plant in here.
Chris is asking about this orange plant. Right, it's an orange flower. It might be a little hard to see, but it's butterfly milkweed. And normally I would find monarch eggs and or caterpillars on there, but we're finding this summer that there aren't very many. I've only found a few, and that seems to be the problem across the Midwest, at least, that people are not finding very many eggs or caterpillars, and we're not quite sure why. I'm sure that they'll figure it out eventually. But this is a really pretty orange, low-growing milkweed. So if you don't want the tall, typical milkweed that most people think of when they think of milkweed, this is a nice alternative. It doesn't get any more than about 3 feet high. Yeah, we have a lot of wild petunia that spreads like crazy down here. We've had a little downpour, so everything's pretty wet. And again, if you don't want it, you can dig it out or move it. There's also...
And what color flowers will they have?
Oh, they will have small purple flowers, and the hummingbirds do like that a lot, so I like having that. In here also is a lot of nodding wild onion, which will bloom later in the summer. And we have 3 kinds of asters, and Jim is going to help me determine which one is which a little bit later, because there seems to be a mystery about our asters. Jim asks, what do I do to maintain this? Besides cutting them lower so I can back out of my driveway and pulling some weeds, not much. I do weed a few things in the front only because I think my neighbors probably appreciate it. But once they grow in really thick, you don't see a lot of weeds. We have our fair share of creeping Charlie because I don't treat the lawn, but that's pretty easy to pull out. And other than that, and the plants that like a little bit more water, I do water those. But other than that, I don't do very much at all. And that's what's nice about native plants. They have deep roots and can get their own water usually and don't require much maintenance.
At the end of the season, you let it stay in the winter?
Yeah, at the end of the season, I just let it stay. I will cut back maybe a few of the really tall ones, but the seeds that are produced in the fall, or in the summer or the fall, are great for the birds. So especially finches, they love the seeds on a lot of these things, on the purple coneflowers especially, which are in a different area. But yeah, I just leave them, and I don't clean it all out in the spring like most people will have a landscaper come along and clean out their beds. I don't do that. I pull out some of it, but I leave most of it to just become mulch for the plants that are coming up, and they come up right through it. So, yeah. We don't expect people in our mentoring program or even people who are part of the WPPC to deal exclusively in native plants. We like a large number of them, but as you can see, I didn't rip out all my non-natives when I started planting natives. So these hostas have been here for years and years. The peonies, the more hostas down the side of the sidewalk, and there's actually a burning bush shrub that I've been trying to eliminate on the other side of the deck. But otherwise, I've just added. So I've put in these 3 witch hazels over here. There's 1, 2, 3. But you can see that the hostas are growing up right around it. And then there's a couple milkweeds that poke their heads up too, and I didn't plant those. So the non-natives and the natives can get along, but of course we think there's more value in the native plants. So we're not expecting people to take out all of their non-natives, but if you can add natives, that's probably a better idea. So this is an area in our backyard. It has really changed a lot over the years. Originally, we had in the distance, where you see that very large redbud tree, we had a swimming pool, an above-ground swimming pool. When we removed it, we planted a lot of native plants there. I'll talk about in a minute. right here is kind of where I like to contain my milkweed, if milkweed can be contained. So I have a lot of swamp milkweed or rose milkweed, which the monarchs normally love. And we have some more of the orange butterfly weed that we talked about in the front. This one's not blooming right now, but there's some over here that is going to bloom pretty soon, and a little bit more over there that's blooming now. It's a really pretty orange, and generally, as I said, the butterflies love it. The monarchs love it. And like I said, we don't need to take out all the non-natives, and I do add a few non-natives. Some petunias and marigolds are fine also. Over here behind me or to my left is a big crop of red monarda, which is not native to this area, right? But it is native to some parts of Illinois. Jim is saying, maybe. We're not quite sure. I can't even remember how that got there, but I like it, and the hummingbirds love it, so I'm leaving it there. There's also a lot of asters and goldenrod back in there, and Jim asked me before if I cut things back. I don't cut them back in the winter, but in the spring I do. I mean, you have to get all of those woody stems and things out of there. I leave them up in the winter for the birds to take the seeds, but in the spring when I'm ready for the new plants to come up, I do remove them, and I just put them in my compost. I don't know, Ken, if you can get a picture of this over here. This is actually a trumpet vine, which is also not native. There are some native trumpet vines, though, are there not? Is there anything that's native? We're not sure. And again, that just decided to grow there, and it grows along my deck, and the hummingbirds love that also. So I can keep it under control. It does like to come up, it pops up just about everywhere, so I find it coming up through the boards of the deck, and I just saw one here somewhere. I just pull them out and throw them away, and here's one right here, and that's how I control them. Behind this little area, you see a lot of really tall plants. That's Joe Pye weed, and I didn't plant any of that. So either the seeds were carried or by wind or by animal or insect or something. And the swallowtails really like that. It has a very pretty, barely pinkish bloom later in the summer. This is an interesting plant. It's a burr sedge. It's not a grass, it's a sedge. We know sedges have edges, and these edges are really sharp. You could actually cut your finger on these. But it has an interesting flower that really doesn't look much like a flower. To me, it reminds me of a satellite or Sputnik, if you're old enough to remember Sputnik. But it's one of my favorite plants. But as you can see, it grows and spreads. And so I had some over here among my milkweed, but it was so big this spring that it was towering over the milkweed, and they couldn't get any sun. So I dug them up, divided them, gave them to all my neighbors and relatives, and planted them back in there. So they don't look great now, but they will. I had a little spot, and I thought, well, where else can I plant my tomato plants? So I stuck them in there too. So it doesn't have to be just your native plants. You take advantage of whatever space you have available. Over here is where I'm trying to develop a pure milkweed garden, I guess I could say. And I have some large ones that came up from I don't know where. Here's one here, and then there's another large set of milkweed plants here. But in amongst them are tiny little ones that I started from seed over the winter, and I'm hoping they'll grow. I'm not sure they will. Some of them I started in different ways. I tried all kinds of different methods, and so some of them have been successful and some of them have not. But I'd like a nice patch of milkweed just for the monarchs. The tree that's right behind me now is a redbud, and I have a lot of them in my yard. I've been joking about it, none of which I planted. I originally had one redbud, maybe 15 or 20 years ago, and from that tree I have multiple red buds now. This is a beautiful tree. I had a white pine in this same area that was removed 2 winters ago, and it had many of the branches had fallen off and fallen right on this red bud, and I kind of just pulled it back up, staked it, tied it up, and it's doing just fine. This is the area where my swimming pool was, and so there's a lot of things in here. I don't do anything to this. I just let it go. It's the one area that I never really touch. There's just about a little bit of everything. A couple of weeks ago, it was almost all golden Alexanders, which is a nice host plant for the swallowtails, and I saw a lot of them on the plants. I have more red buds and some pagoda dogwoods that also just came up as volunteers from one tree that is from quite far away in my yard from years ago. And then last year, I noticed that I have, if I move the red bud branch, a nice little oak tree right there. So I'm going to let that go. You know, an oak tree is a really valuable thing. And behind it is another little oak tree that's coming up. So it's always interesting to see what develops. So the pagoda dogwoods and the redwoods here, I didn't plant any of them. They all just came up on their own. And I'm going to let the trees go, and the plants can do whatever they're going to do, and they will just have to adapt, or I'll have to plant something else here, and that would be okay. This is the very back of our yard, and these are some things that I did plant. We have a serviceberry that's not doing real well, just like the one in the front, but when it produces the berries, the cedar waxwings just are thick on it. They love it. On either side is a nannyberry viburnum, and in the back, it's just a long row along the property line of all kinds of different plants that I just could not throw in the compost heap or garbage. Some of them are non-natives. Most are natives. I just didn't need them, or they weren't growing in the right place. And so I just planted a long line of all kinds of things back there. I call it my plant graveyard because I put it back there and thinking they're probably going to die, but they just never do. And so there's actually some very interesting things back there. Also back behind those trees over there, we don't need to walk over there, but it's a big brush pile. And I think it's important to have something like that for the animals and the birds. They need to hide sometimes, and some of them actually live back in there. And that's fine with me. I don't mind the rabbits and squirrels and chipmunks and things like that. I mean, they were here long before I was. So I keep a little brush pile back there for them, and a little, there's an area back there I'm clearing and hoping to add some more milkweed to. But there's always a project. It's never finished. If you're a gardener, you know that you're never really finished with anything. This is an area where originally we had 2 honey locust trees that came down, and I thought, oh, there's an opportunity to make another native garden. Most of this I did plant, although some of the things are just volunteers. One of my favorite plants is right here, and this is Rattlesnake Master. Again, it doesn't have much of a flower. It also has kind of like the other one I was showing you, the sedge I was showing you, has a little round ball at the top, but it's very interesting. We've got some purple cone flowers coming. We've got one so far, and the indigo, the blue indigo, is done blooming. That's over here. And this really made a nice shrub, but again, we have redbud branches growing into it. This one grew really nicely on its, without being staked or anything this year. And over here is the white one, which is blooming now. We have some more asters. We're going to have the cone flowers in here. The cone flowers were hard to establish because I would plant them and the rabbits would eat them. And I would replant them and the rabbits would eat them. I finally think it was Liquid Fence, the product Liquid Fence, that helped discourage the rabbits so they could get kind of a foothold and start growing. And of course we have some milkweed because who knows where that milkweed came from, but I didn't plant it there. And then this is the original burr sedge that I bought many years ago and planted. So this is all, and there are several redbud trees in there too, which I think I'm going to have to remove. Under this white pine is a lot of Solomon seal that you can see right now, and native geranium, and a lot of jack in the pulpit. When they developed the homes behind us, I knew that they were just going to make lawn out of that woodsy area. So I went back and dug out all the plants that I could find that were native. So it was mostly the geranium, the jack in the pulpit, and the Solomon seal. And I planted them all here under this pine tree, and they seem to love it. And then the other day I noticed that there is actually, Pat Sullivan Schroyer noticed this. Well, I knew that I had this little oak tree growing here. And then we found another one back in among the Solomon seal. So I'm just letting them go. I don't know if this pine tree is going to last forever, but hopefully a very nice oak tree will come up under it. On the other side is a pagoda dogwood that's growing up among these things also. Off to my left is my original pagoda dogwood that when I bought was like a stick in a pot, and it came from our plant sale, which takes place at the end of February every year at MCC. And Janine Damon had taken it from her property and just stuck it in a pot. And I thought, okay, I'll try it. I think I planted it in 3 different places in this yard before I finally put it over there, and it really took off. It's growing kind of crooked because it's growing toward the light, even though it's an understory tree. But it's a beautiful tree, and from my bedroom upstairs, I love looking out at the flowers when it blooms, and then it produces berries for the birds later in the season. This is another one of my favorite plants. It's a delphinium, and it'll bloom with a blue blossom, a blue flower. And I especially like it because the hummingbirds love it, but I like it because it's right outside my kitchen window also. And I think that's important. Plant things where you can see them and appreciate them. So all summer after the blossom, the flower appears, the hummingbirds will just be crazy for that. And over here on this side, there's a little royal catchfly, which they also seem attracted to. They will even go into the hosta blossoms. The flower on one of them over there is a big white flower, and I've seen hummingbirds go right into the flower, and you can't even see the hummingbird anymore because the flower is so big. So that's one of my favorites. And down here is a little tiny, delicate-looking plant, and that's another milkweed. That's a whorled, W-H-O-R-L-E-D, milkweed. And it has really liked that area, but it's in a little, not enough sun, so I think that one maybe needs to be moved. I'm just going to watch it for a while. And again, we have more red buds. So over here is another one of my favorite plants. This is a cardinal flower, and it generally likes it really wet also. So if we haven't had rain for a while, I will water these. Generally, I don't water my native plants, but those I'll give some water to because I really like them. And again, the hummingbirds love those. There's another plant in here that will bloom soon. It's called a purple prairie mallow. Did I get that right? Purple poppy mallow, not purple poppy mallow, yeah. That has a very pretty purplish red flower on it, and that's just another favorite one. And again, you might be able to see as we pass by the bird feeders. We had a lot of orioles, both Baltimore and orchard orioles this spring, and they love that grape jelly and those orange slices. So if you want to attract orioles, put out some grape jelly in the spring along with some orange slices, and you'll probably have them as they're passing through. They don't usually stay very long, although we do have a pair now. They do, well, not as many as, we had so many this spring. Deb says that they do stay. I know we do have some here, but I don't see them like I did in the spring. And I want to see a nest. I've never seen an oriole nest, and I want to see that hanging nest, and I've never seen one. This is another favorite plant. This is an iris, a dwarf crested iris. It's got some Solomon seal growing up among it, but it has the most delicate, pretty little purple flower in the spring. And we have more Joe Pye weed. It looks like something's eating the Joe Pye weed this year. I don't know what it is exactly, but it's got a lot of holes in the leaves, and I just figure I have plenty of it. What do you think it is?
It is a moth.
A moth. Oh, okay. I have plenty to share, so that's fine with me. And here's that original pagoda dogwood that I was talking about. So after I took all the plants out of the neighbor's yard and planted them here, I wanted kind of a path to go through here. So I don't know, Ken, if you're going to be able to go through here with a camera, but it's just kind of a nice area when there aren't too many mosquitoes to walk through. This plant is a goat's beard. It grows more like a shrub, but it dies back every year and comes back just like any other plant would. But it grows so big that it looks like a shrub. But it's just got such a beautiful flower, blossom to it. I just love it. And of course, there are some celandine poppies, which I have everywhere. There's some over here that are in the sun, and they just spread like crazy. So if you don't want them to spread, all you have to do is find every plant and pick the pod off of it and take the seeds, or, get rid of it. The seeds are all in the pod, but that's how they spread. So I think there's just 2 goat's beards in here. They just went a little crazy this year. And this is what's the real name of doll's eyes? Not the Latin name, but the baneberry. Yeah. So this is a baneberry, and this will have little white. They look like berries with a little dot in the middle that look like eyes. So that's yes, they are poisonous. Yeah, you don't want to eat them. I've made sure the kids next door know that because they're very interested in some of these plants, and I always say, don't eat that one. Don't eat anything. Yeah. Along here is where I generally have a lot of spring flowers. So the Virginia bluebells are just dying back now, and I can't cut them off or anything. They need that green to remain on them to get some to nurture their roots, and so they don't look great right now. And there were some trillium and things like that in there also. So that's just an area that changes with the season, and I'm not going to do anything to stop its progress. This is a sedum, which there was nothing growing here. I couldn't get anything to grow here, so I started planting sedum about maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and it spreads and makes a nice carpet, and then I decided to continue it around to the front, and so it's filling in, but it's really kind of a pain to have to weed, because the most common weed that you find in there looks just like the plant. So I'm down on my hands and knees with practically like tweezers trying to get that weed out of there, but it's worth it, and once it fills in, then you don't have that problem. This little tree here is my pride and joy. It's my new blue beech. This was, there was an old apple tree, a decorative or a flowering crab there that finally died. But I loved it because it was right outside our bedroom window, and I loved watching the birds. Last year I watched a woodpecker make a nest in it. But the tree was just dying. It was obvious, and it was not healthy, not good looking. So I wanted a native plant, and I researched, and after a lot of advice gathering, I decided on a blue beech. And it looks like it's doing fine so far. So far, so good. There's a goat's beard underneath it, and it seems to like that spot too. This plant is interesting. Deb's asking about this plant right here, which looks just like foam flower. And Pat asked about it the other day too. It's not, but it looks like it. It's not a native. My sister gave it to me many years ago, one plant, and it was called the Spanish Cross or some name like that. I don't know what the original name was. And I thought, okay, I'll put it in there, She doesn't know I like natives, and it comes back every year, and it's really very pretty. I see another little oak tree coming up here too. And then I see a lot of lamium. I don't know whatever possessed me to plant that stuff, and I'm so sorry I ever did. But it is everywhere, and it's very hard to remove, so it gets into everything. It's pretty, and it's a nice ground cover if that's what you want, but it serves no purpose. It doesn't, it's nothing for the birds or the bees or any kind of insects or anything, and I'm working on getting rid of it. But again, it's always a project. We're talking about these oak trees here that I did not plant. The squirrels or chipmunks did. They came from acorns. We have bur oaks in this neighborhood. There's a very large bur oak in my neighbor's yard, which is just a magnificent tree. And so I'm asking if I can leave all 3 of these trees together, or will they be too crowded? This one in the middle seems to have some kind of a gall on its leaves this year, on a few of the leaves. But I know that there are, oak trees support so many species of insects and Lepidoptera that, again, we have enough leaves to share. So my question is, can I leave all 3 of these trees in here together and will they all be healthy? I'm not sure, but we'll have to find that out. So again, something I didn't plant, but some animal decided that would be a good place to bury the acorns, and that's what happened. So I think that's about it.
What's the yellow flower?
Oh, the yellow flower in here is a non-native. Most of what's in here is non-native. This is a false St. John's wort, I think. It is in the loosestrife family, yeah. I have tried to remove that many times too, and it just loves living there. It came from my neighbor many years ago, and it's not bad. It's just a little bit, and it doesn't spread like crazy, and it looks real pretty under that oak tree right now. There's also a lot of Jack in the Pulpit in here that has planted itself. Some Joe Pye weed, lots of Monarda, and I see another oak tree over there that's probably almost as tall as me that I didn't even know was there. So, always changing. So thank you very much for joining us on our virtual walk today. Hopefully the next one or some future ones we'll be able to do with a lot more participants. I just want to make sure that everybody understands that you can add natives to your landscape in any setting, and it doesn't have to be a big, huge property. Ours, as I said, is only about a half acre, but even in-town lots that are usually maybe about a quarter acre can always appreciate some native plants. They are generally carefree once you get them established, and they provide so much in terms of habitat and food for wildlife and for nature, which is what we should be taking into consideration, I think, every time we plant something. So thanks for coming.